Okay, it is in fact that time.
Cool.
So if y'all are ready.
It is in fact that time. Welcome everybody to Portland Cocktail Week Distance Learning. Today, my name is Louise Marquis. I'm the National Portfolio Brand Ambassador for Campari America. And today it is my extreme pleasure to welcome and host the wonderful, singular, magical, amazing Caer Maiko of Daijoubu Pop Up, Austin's Bartender of the Year every year, but I think officially in 2019?
2019, yes.
2019, and one of my favorite people. So, Caer, I'm going to let you take it away. Do you have how else do I introduce you? We have Asian American Girl Club.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm wearing today. Yeah. There were a lot of like Asian American girl things growing up. I was lucky that at least it was the 90s, so I got Sailor Moon. But outside of that, very happy I get this now.
I love it. It's great. So, what are you talking about today?
Okay. So I know that we're still waiting for a couple people to jump in, but just to kind of get
we're going to let some people join. Absolutely. But just to like give a kind of idea of like, what are you going to be talking about today?
I run this cool pop-up called Daijoubu Pop Up. And in the process of having to make a bunch of cocktails that we like to describe as super Asian cocktails, I feel like I've learned a lot about adding personal touches and cultural touches to menus and drinks and spaces. And I don't think these things I've learned are specific to necessarily Asian flavors. It's just because that's what I like, the palette that I've been working with. So today I hope to share a little bit of what I've learned and then talk a little bit about what I think could be useful for other people who are trying to impart more of their personality or more of their cultural background into their drinks.
I love that. I'm so excited. And it could even be personality. It could be passions. It could be your cultural background. It could be something like the place you grew up in or the place you're from or like your love of horses or
I definitely made cocktails about my love of cats. So
yeah, there you go. So like, yeah, your
totally
love of animals or sports or music. But just being able to take your love, and that's what I think you've done so beautifully. And that's one of the things I like adore about you is you've taken this thing that you love and that you are, and then put that into your cocktails, and then also gone the next step further, which is to serve the community that you're also championing.
Absolutely.
So to offer support, to make sponsorships, to like get the word out is so cool.
Yeah, well, I think that the greater things about bars aren't just the cocktails, it's what else comes with that, the community, the space, the friendships, the conversations, the joys. And while we can work on that within the confines of cocktails, I think it's obviously very important for everyone to look at the surrounding as well.
I love that. So let's jump in. It looks like we are live on the site, and I think some people are joining.
Awesome. I think that we have a slideshow that can join us on screen soon.
Like magically appear. There you go.
Yeah, magic. Okay. I have a little bit of a script, but feel free to interrupt me with questions. And Louise, I might ask you to the kind of questions I would ask an audience if I were doing this presentation.
Go for it.
Live.
I love it. I am your audience today. I am here just to like make just to support whatever you want to say.
And I'll ask questions also, if you have questions, jump in. But also, everyone who is out there watching, the amazing people with Portland Cocktail Week are collecting your questions for us. So at the end, we can have a Q&A. So if you have questions at any point, please throw that in there. This is a class for you. This is not as much about us showing off Daijoubu, rather about us telling you what we've learned so that you don't have to do all of the hard work and get to your personal hard work. So for those of you who maybe just joined or missed the first section, my name is Caer Maiko Ferguson. I am a bartender in Austin, Texas, and I'm one of the co-founders of Daijoubu Pop Up. For those who haven't had the pleasure of attending one of our pop-ups, or I haven't had the pleasure of making a cocktail for you, I hope you've heard really good things about the work that me and Sharon Yueng have been doing. Today, I'm going to be talking about what I've learned while trying to execute a culturally specific and empowering pop-up. And I hope that'll be helpful for any of you who want to add that to your cocktails, menus, events, bars, life in general. because a lot of today we're going to be talking about my specific cultural background, I just want to give you a little bit of insight to what that is, so that when I start saying Asian things, you're not like, what, is she Asian? I was lucky enough to grow up in Los Angeles, which has a huge Asian American community, not just Japanese culture, but like the best Korean barbecue outside of Korea, a lot of people say, and so many more, just such a melting pot that I feel like I was able to taste so many Asian flavors growing up. And that's super convenient growing up Japanese American to just have that access. People go to Little Tokyo or Sawtell and get boba or get, the groceries that my mom needs. We didn't have to drive super far to find the things that we wanted to stock our pantry with. I moved to Boston. I've done a fair amount of international travel, and now I live in Austin. And I feel like I've experienced a lot of different cultural spaces, but I'm never going to know any cultural space better than I know my own. And my own is Hapa and Nisei. These are two fun words that not a lot of people will interact with unless you're Asian American. So I just kind of want to give you a little bit of a background. Hapa is technically a Hawaiian word that originally was used for anyone of mixed ethnicity. It was sometimes used in a slightly derogatory manner, and it's kind of been reappropriated by the modern Hawaiian and Californian youth. And it's now more commonly used of anyone who's of mixed Asian descent. And then Nisei is very specific to Japanese immigrants. Anyone who is born outside the country, but their parent was born in Japan. So my mother's Japanese native, and I was born in California, so I'm first generation American, but in the Japanese culture, I'd be considered Nisei. Now that you know a little bit about me, today we are going to be primarily talking about Asian flavors, and I wanted to clarify a couple things. I'm not here to claim all Asian culture. It's not mine. But what I can call from is the specific experiences that me and my business partner have actually had. I'm not necessarily an expert because I have some sort of like blood inheritance or anything like that. I'm an expert because the food that my mom cooked me and the tea shops I went to as a teenager and the months I traveled in Japan in my 20s. The birth rate is a little plus, but it's more about where I've been and what I've tasted. More culture, less race. At least it is for me. But enough about me. Let's learn about what we've been doing.
I love hearing about you. I think it's really interesting to know your history and to know your background, and to have these definitions for you has been important and helpful. And like just even reading those definitions was like, oh, that's interesting to know that like you finding ways to define your identity.
Yeah, I think
as you dive into this thing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, like, I guess a really easy analogy is, when you're growing up, you're starting to learn like your sexual orientation and how you define yourself there. And some people like terms because it helps them be like, okay, this is who I am. I found my niche. And some people don't, and that's super okay. But for me, when I say I'm Nisei Hapa, that gives such a definitive idea to anyone else who falls under those categories of the kind of life that I grew up with. So it's exciting. I have terms. So the concept behind Daijoubu Pop Up is a super Asian pop-up. I started this with my business partner, Sharon Yueng. She is first generation Chinese American. She was born in Chinatown in San Francisco, lived most of her life there, and then moved to Austin a few years back. We also work with my husband, Sam, who is not Asian at all, but obviously because he's been with me for a very, very, very long time, and also now has Japanese family, has grown to understand a lot of the culture, which is awesome and really exciting as someone with a partner to have someone who understands that. There aren't a ton of Asian women in Austin, like in general. We're a small population here, but Asian Americans are the largest growing minority in Texas. We definitely have a presence. Most of it is in far north Austin. But if you're looking at cocktail bars, I have only recently started to find like a handful of other Asian Americans who are doing the same sort of craft cocktail thing that me and Sharon have been doing. But when we first met years ago now, it was just really exciting to find someone else to geek out about. I remember her friend Bran started working with us at the Roosevelt Room. I heard them talking about how they do a rice blend when they like cook rice at home. And I was like, yes, people who understand that rice has flavor, because I've spent so much of my life arguing with people who say that like rice doesn't have a flavor. I'm like, okay, well then bread doesn't have a flavor either. So finding that
rice definitely has a flavor. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, right?
Okay, yeah, of course.
I don't know why that seems to be a thing. So we started playing with our original flavors, and we found, we started working with Asian flavors in our original cocktails. And once we started talking together, we found that things just worked out way better. It's great to have someone to bounce your ideas off of. Obviously, you
guys were working together. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. You guys were working together in Austin. Yeah. So you were coworkers, and then behind the bar, you were like developing new cocktails and kind of bouncing things off each other.
Exactly. I was at Pesce when she started at Roosevelt Room. And so I saw her there and I was like, wow, she is so cool. And then once I started working at Roosevelt Room, we immediately like bonded and started to constantly play with the idea of like, oh, can we make Asian cocktails? And what does that mean? And the coolest thing I found with this is the concept of a native palate. I don't know if anyone else has kind of like played with this idea before, but when you grow up, you're eating a lot of different kinds of foods and you have different kinds of flavors in your life. Some people who eat more spicy foods build up some sort of tolerance to spice. Some people have, aversions to things and connections to things. But by growing up eating a ton of Asian food, those flavors are what's our native palate. And it was amazing to see Sharon work with cocktails, and like she's always been incredibly talented, but as soon as we started to add in flavors that like she grew up cooking with, all of a sudden her cocktails were mind-blowingly good. And I was like, oh, this could really work. And that's when we entered Espelon Cocktail Fights, as Anne-Louise knows. And through the success of that, we're inspired to start to do even more crazy Asian cocktails. So since March, it's crazy. What has happened since that. But yeah, we threw our first event in March 2019. And since then, we bought a bus and completely renovated it into a tour van and recently put in a little well in it. So theoretically, we can start doing events out of the bus once it's safe to be outside around people. We've toured Texas, hosted 10 full pop-ups, collaborated with more. Each of our pop-ups has at least one Asian American bartender from whatever city or culture we are around involved, because this is not just about what me and Sharon are doing. This is about the culture that we're trying to grow and promote. We curated a cocktail box with shaker and spoon. We've had our cocktails featured and our charity work featured in Punch, Daily Beast, Washington Post, Tribeza, Eater, and more. And just recently, we went through all of our charity work that we've done over the past year and a half, and we've realized between us and every other group we've worked with, we've raised over $11,000 for charity.
That's amazing.
It's crazy. I kind of wish I had known that was a thing. We could have been a nonprofit at this point. And then made about 40 different original cocktails during that time that we all clarify or label Super Asian cocktails. So it's been a crazy year and a half, but I hope the thing you take most from that is that if you could also do this, like me and Sharon are very hardworking and fairly talented, I would say, but also just some other bartenders. So the biggest goal out of today is if this information is useful for you, I hope you're able to take it and also raise $11,000 for charity and be in a bunch of magazines.
And buy a bus.
And buy a bus.
You guys have made money off this too, right? Like this has been like, you've been made enough money to like support the vision and keep it going.
Absolutely. It's been not a ton of money for us as individuals, but we've been able to continually build up the value of the company so that as soon as it is safe out, we have enough money to fly places and throw bigger events and things like that. We're still in the startup phase, but at least we have been able to turn profits, which is very exciting. Actually, today is the 1 year anniversary of us getting our Kickstarter funded. So,
oh, nice.
I know, really good day to be doing
That's
this.
Exciting. Yeah, I love that.
So I put up a bunch of cocktails here so you can kind of see what I mean by Super Asian cocktails. There's the sweet and sour sour, which is based off the flavors of actual sweet and sour sauce, but done in an egg white sour form, topped with a sesame crusted wonton. One of my favorites that I've ever made, the Crazy Rich Lychee Martini. I cried like 5 times when I first saw that movie, not just because it's like a really sweet rom-com, but because I've never seen such a complex representation of Asian identities in a Western film. And be able to see that was really exciting. So I needed to make a cocktail that referenced that. And also, like, lychee martinis are great, but they could be way better. And lychees are delicious and such a staple of Asian fruit that I couldn't not play with it. For anyone who grew up Asian American, we all drank Yakult or a different yogurt probiotic beverage as children. And so at our very first pop-up, we made our milk and honey. And I remember a group of like 6 Asian people were sitting at the bar, and they all were looking at the little cup as I poured into it. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, I grew up drinking that. That's in a cocktail." And it was honestly like my favorite moment ever because they found themselves in a drink that I was making, and it was so empowering. And then
I love that.
It was honestly a heartwarming, beautiful moment. And I continue to find those in many events. When we were in Dallas, one of my favorite bartenders, who is Korean American, was holding our banchan martini, and banchan is pickles that are usually served before a meal, and explaining to a lovely brand ambassador who happened to be Scottish about like the heritage of his people that went into this drink, and just holding like this drink and plate, explaining it, and I just was like practically crying. Really fun, emotional things just to come out of a cocktail.
It's important to be seen. It's important to make things visible and make, like in the way that movie was exciting for you. I think this is exciting in the world of cocktails, to be able to see yourself in cocktails.
Absolutely.
It's really cool. Yeah, and really important.
It's exciting. It makes me feel cozy. And then we also put in Ramon's onsen. At almost all of our pop-ups, we do a broth and agave shot. For those who know what sangrita is, not sangria, but sangrita, the usually it's acidic and spicy and sweet combined flavor juice nectar type thing that you sip beside an agave spirit. We kind of flipped that, and instead of serving sangrita, we serve Asian soup. But it's served side by side so that you could have kind of a pairing experience in your mouth. And Sharon made a amazing tom kha soup that when we were at Nickel City, that everyone who had it was like, "Where did you get this?" And Sharon's like, "I made it," and everyone's like jaws dropped to the ground.
She's a genius.
She's amazing.
Like the way she thinks about flavor, genius.
Yes, I'm very lucky to have a Sharon in my life. Find yourself a Sharon, everyone. So we charred some shishitos and infused that into Espolon Blanco, and we clip a little bit of cilantro and Thai basil to the rim of the copita that it's served in. But that's delicious, and that's just kind of a smattering of the drinks that we do. Other cocktails that we've made: Banchan Martini, Tapioca Express, General Tso's Perfect Manhattan, a dope-ass Midori Sour. There are lots of crazy cocktails that we've made that are all really fun and playful. So our events have been popular, but I think that can be split up to a couple different successes. One, obviously, people love Asian food and culture in America. It's not a hard sell anymore. Like, everyone who's in their 20s and 30s now grew up with Toonami, so we all watch Dragon Ball Z or Sailor Moon, and like ramen is a thing that's hip now. Like, we definitely jumped on this train at a really good time, because I don't have to explain to people everything, at least. So even if you're not Asian American, you can usually find something that you relate to within here. But I think the majority of the success comes from the super element. And that's more what I'm talking about today. The way to make a cocktail super whatever concept it is, to have a concept and expand on it and bring layers to it. And so the rule that me and Sharon have when we're making a drink is that every single element of the drink must go back to the concept. Every choice you make has to have purpose and identity. And today we're going to break down 2 of the drinks so that you can kind of see layer by layer how we build those up, and then use that to help build your own. But before I get into the lecture, I want to thank Campari America and Anne Louise.
Nice pleasure.
Espolòn Cocktail Fights has done a lot for me, not just because of, it's cool to win things and show off, but more, it was a cocktail competition that really allowed you to be super playful and put so much personality into a drink rather than just a concept. And this, I couldn't have thought of a better place for us to be testing something like Super Asian cocktails. Where else would we be able to make a drink that tastes like orange chicken and then have someone in a chicken costume come on stage with us and give a speech, like, I don't know, poem in both Chinese and English at the same time to convince people of our identities. So
you really leaned into the thesis with that. Was like, how do we make this as super Asian as possible? And it was like layer on layer on layer on layer with your performance. And just so you guys know, Caer also won Cocktail Fights on her own and then came back when we made it a tag team and won that. So she's a 2-time national Cocktail Fights winner. She's no longer allowed to compete, nor is anyone in Austin. I think Austin is like not allowed to compete anymore since y'all keep winning. But
I'm sorry.
Just Beyond brought it, like, so wonderful and so fun to see you two work together to create this thing that was such a amazing synthesis of both of you.
And that's honestly the rules that we're talking about today were really first put together while working on that cocktail. Because we were like, oh, we can put orange stuff in here and it's going to taste like orange chicken. But I'm like, but what about the rice that comes with the orange chicken? And what about this? We'll go into that when we get to that cocktail. But first, let's talk about our first case study today. It is called the paper crane. It includes Aperol. And thank you, Campari, for that Aperol that I now get in my home. It's very, very great. So this drink is obviously a play on a paper plane. Asian whiskey, Aperol, Amaro, banana liqueur, Asian citrus blend, burdock root tincture, sesame oil, and an origami paper crane. You can see that picture there to give an idea. We haven't shot like a professional photo of this one in a while, so that one was just off Instagram, but that's fine. We're gonna break this down. Obviously, variation on paper plane. When we're looking at things to play with in terms of Asian cocktails, I feel like almost everyone I've worked with in a bar has wanted to make a paper crane cocktail because it's just too obvious of a name. Like you hear paper plane, you're like, I can use Asian whiskey in this, and this will be a paper crane. I got this. Yeah. I got this. This is a concept. But while, yes, that's a fun concept to play with, there are going to be a lot more layers to make it qualify as super anything. Super fun fact about this cocktail, it's going to be in Masa's book, Art of a Japanese Cocktail. That's coming out next year.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so great.
Remember that every time you're in a cocktail competition or sitting at a bar, it's a fun little opportunity to make a friend that will make a huge difference in your career. And Masa has done that many times, which is great. I've met him like twice, and he's supported me in so many distant ways. It's amazing. So concept, paper plane, super easy. Spirit. So it's interesting because you're working with a split-based cocktail, like it's equal parts usually, but people still will categorize it as a whiskey cocktail because that's the way the majority of American drinkers still think. So the easy transition, change from a American whiskey to an Asian whiskey. Because it's an equal parts cocktail, I tend to find a more robust and higher proof whiskey works better, but that's just balancing cocktails. That has nothing to do with the Asian element here. But always remember that when you're choosing a spirit from a certain country, you're going to be supporting the culture that created that spirit. Whether it's the water they use, the grains that they use, the style of the distiller and the pot stills. Most of us who have studied the history of spirits know that so many of tendencies in spirits tend to come from legal ramifications that existed, like in Ireland, how they were taxed, and Japanese learned how to make whiskey from the Scottish, so how their cultures combine. But no matter what, when you're taking a spirit made by a culture, you're going to be representing that culture. And the amount of Asian people who come down and sit at the bar, even if they aren't Japanese, who are really excited by the fact that there is Japanese whiskey, is a perfect example of that. Flavor. Oh, here, let's go back. And Louise, how would you describe a paper plane?
A paper plane is a delightful balance of citrus, bitter, and whiskey. It's unexpected, but like the combination of those 4 ingredients really do an amazing job coming together to create something kind of like the perfect sour.
I absolutely
How's
agree.
that?
That's perfect. So when looking at this cocktail, I broke down the different major flavors that you would find. Citrusy and then bitter are definitely 2 of them. We're specifically looking at like bitter orange notes for sure. Mellow herbs, a little bit of chocolate caramel baking spice that's kind of hidden in there, but in a very low note. That's not a push forward thing. So first I looked at the citrus element. So you want to make a bright citrusy cocktail, but you also want to remember how you're blending this in with the other Asian flavors that are going to exist. So there are a lot of Asian citrus that you can choose from: pomelo, mandarin, yuzu, you could calamansi, you could go on. For this particular citrus blend, we're going to be using primarily lemon juice with a mix of yuzu concentrate and mandarin orange. Yuzu to add a brighter note, and then mandarin orange to connect it more to the Aperol, but add kind of more of the bittersweet there. So you have citrus and then citrus. And then we're moving into more of the supporting flavors: bitter orange, chocolate, caramel, baking spice, all those fun things. I was thinking about Asian flavor that would pair well with orange, baking spice, and chocolate. And I landed on banana. Obviously, fresh banana pairs really well with orange. Cooked banana pairs really well with more of the baking notes and desserty flavors that exist there. And while bananas aren't strictly Asian, their incorporation into cooking is primarily found in South American, Polynesian, and East Asian cooking. So I feel like we can scoop that right up into our circle.
Sure, come on over. We'll take it.
Yeah, get in there.
Sure.
Polynesian and East Asian and Southeast Asian have been clumped into the Asian culture by every form I've ever had to fill out for the government. So we're all one big happy family now. Even though we all have our little pockets, I feel like it's important that we're incorporating and supporting each other. So a lot of our cocktails have an influence from cooking, specifically because so few cultures have a lot of like traditional beverages. And the ones that they have tend to be really specific to like whatever fresh fruit is found in that area. So we jump into the cooking elements really quickly. But how to contextualize banana into a even more Asian place, especially an East Asian flavor palette. For those who haven't had banana cooked in sesame oil, you really should.
That sounds so good.
It's such a great flavor combo. Banana and cooked banana and sesame is one of my favorites. So I was like, okay, I know I need to add sesame in here, but I want it to be subtle because sesame can really overtake so many flavors. So I ended up using it as an aromatic, but I need some other element in here to help make the banana sesame thing not like a 2, but like a triangle, like a full flavor combination. And that's when I tried burdock root tincture. I was talking to James Merkel, I think that's his last name, in Denver, and he was telling me about how he had added burdock root to a cocktail. I was like, whoa, I know exactly what I need to add this to now. But that is a very Japanese ingredient to be using. It's used in yamagobo, which is something that was in my house constantly growing up. It's kind of a quick pickle, sweet and savory dish. Yamagobo or burdock root is like a really long mountain root vegetable, but it's like that long and maybe like 1.5 inches in diameter. So unless you're at an Asian market or grew up eating it, you probably don't encounter it very often. But by soaking that in high proof alcohol and then adding a couple dashes to it, I was able to add this earthy note to the cocktail that not only combined the banana sesame flavor profile, but also I think supported more of the Amaro notes in there as well. So it's just a little
super earthy.
Yes,
yeah,
very
like
earthy.
Super earthy. Yeah. Even like you'll have it like pickled, or you'll have it like on like shredded on something, but it's like it has like that really earthy flavor. So I think that pairs really beautifully with the Amaro. That's so smart.
And so now we have a paper plane that has 3 Asian flavors that did not exist there before, but also specifically supports the flavors that were already in the cocktail. There's no reason to make a paper plane and just add Asian stuff. There's the reason why you're doing a riff is because you found specific flavors in this cocktail that you thought could connect to other flavors. And then obviously we topped it with a little bit of sesame oil. Memory and aroma are very connected. And so whenever you're going to be like reaching the drink up, you're automatically connecting to a memory for anyone who's ever cooked with sesame oil, which I'm guessing almost every other Asian American has. So you're adding a memory there. But probably my most passionate area in this drink is the visual. For those who don't know, I went to art school for film and animation. So visual storytelling is like in my brain no matter what. It's probably the reason why our pop-ups have so many decorations and so many like projectors and lights and stuff going on. I couldn't not go 100% with the visuals. So I'm a big fan of a visual garnish if it has purpose. And I think that my paper crane clipped to the rim of the glass that exists in this cocktail brings a very specific purpose. The guest doesn't have to know everything about why you're doing it for them to realize that it's important. Just like when you're making art, like the viewer doesn't have to know exactly why each brushstroke is there or why every chord is with each chord to kind of figure out the bigger piece. I've been folding paper cranes since at least I was 4 years old. I don't actually remember learning to do it. I've just always done it. My aunt Jeannie on my father's side was telling me like she remembers me as a small child teaching her how to make a paper crane, and that being like a very specific memory that I was like, wow, I don't remember that age at all. So I knew it at that point. So each crane each drink has a crane that I have folded. The act of folding a complex garnish like that is kind of a weird act of hospitality because I'm taking the time before service even starts to fold 60 paper cranes so that each guest can have a paper crane. And while like it doesn't necessarily bring anything to the flavor of the drink, it has a very thoughtful purpose that people will know. And these like homegrown and personal touches are, I think, what makes Daijoubu so easy to connect to. It has a lot of soul, at least I like to think so. So it's telling the guests a little bit about your life, even though you're not directly telling them it. It's showing them that you know to do this thing, and also you want to do this thing for them. And that way you're kind of opening up to the guest. And when you open up to people, they usually have an easier time opening up in return. So I've like basically in my brain created the idea that yes, it's a paper crane clipped to a glass, but also it's a weird emotional opening of your heart and hospitality. And that's much more powerful than your average garnish.
It totally is. And also the meditative act of origami, right, is like a centering practice as well. Absolutely. And a practice of the pursuit of perfection. And something you will probably do your whole life in some way, right? You're always going to be working towards that perfect paper crane. Yeah. And then also it's like there's a wish component to it, right? Isn't there like to fold a 1,000 paper cranes? Yeah, so there's this wish that's connected to it. And I think even if I'm not Japanese, but I knew that story. I know that. And so if I see this, I know that like, oh, she took the time to like make a wish for me. Yeah. Is something that there's like not even it's not said like you said, but it's there, and you know that someone took this time to make something really special for you. So there is like you're even blending in like a level of almost like spirituality and mindfulness and like the cultural traditions, the religious traditions that come from these places as well, which is really cool.
It's wild because when I put it on, when I made the paper cranes and we're putting on it, I was not thinking about any of this. And it wasn't until having to sit down and be like, okay, how am I breaking down my actual process for making these drinks? Because at this point, me and Sharon just go back and forth so quickly. It's like, oh, okay, we're gonna add this and we'll add that. And let's test this. Oh, perfect, great, we're done. So we don't have to necessarily analyze our process as much. But when I start to sit down and think about what I would teach and what this class would be like, and then I went through each of our cocktails, I'm like, wow, we really do have a very specific process. So it's fun to analyze your own cocktails. Feel free to do that on your own sometime.
To be thoughtful and to see like, what is this thing that people are responding to? And it's often the thoughtfulness. It's often that attention to detail, like you're saying, and the intention behind something can be really powerful.
Yeah. People love hospitality. It's why they go places. They can make drinks at home. So hopefully they won't, because I like to have a job. But example number 2, the 2018 Espolòn Cocktail Fight's winning drink, Ramon's Revival. This drink includes sesame horchata infused Espolòn añejo, a no chicken orange chicken syrup, citric acid, orange juice, and a habanero tincture. It's garnished with a fortune cookie and a little rose of orange peel. So this is the drink that Louise and I were talking about earlier, and technically the first Daijoubu cocktail. So winning in 2018 gave us the proof that like Super Asian cocktails was a powerful enough concept that we should at least throw an event, which is great and why we're here today, or at least one of the reasons. The concept behind this drink is Chinese American orange chicken. For those who are familiar with Espolòn, you probably already know this, but on the bottle there's this fun guy. He's a rooster and his name is Ramon. And when looking into ways to connect the Mexican culture and visual identity of Espolòn with Asian things, because that's pretty much our whole concept when we first started, we landed on playing with the idea of Ramon and the chicken. And we found a little bit of Chinese mythology about creatures called fengwangs, which are basically like bird dragons. And we called ourselves the Fengwang Fighters. But we continued to riff on the chicken idea. And one of the most iconic dishes for Asian Americans is orange chicken. We've all had it, whether you're Asian or not. I don't know anyone who hasn't had orange chicken or something close to it. What was super interesting about this process is Sharon being very like first generation Chinese American. She had never had like bad orange chicken before. So when
like she's never had like bad
like
bad,
Express
like Americanized
nonsense. Yeah. So when we were thinking about it, we went to 99 Ranch here in Austin, and we found one of the little kiosks that sort of food did have an orange chicken. They also had a lot of really more traditional Chinese food, which we bought, but we got the orange chicken so that we could taste it. And we wanted to use at least like a legit Chinese restaurant's version of it. So that would be like a, I don't know, a little bit of that American like candied orange thing, but a little bit of that more traditional Chinese spice thing going on. But there are definitely some touches of Mexican flavors and cultures in here as well, just a little bit. But that was more for playing with the concept of the competition. Obviously, tequila is not what people think of when you think of Asian flavors. So it was fun to figure out, how do I make tequila really Asian? And what is more Asian in flavor than rice? And what else uses rice in Mexican cooking? So we played with the idea of horchatas and just the way that people make orgeats and blend things into making different kinds of milks. So we took some sweet brown rice. It's a short grain brown that can be used in sweeter dishes. And we toasted it in sesame oil until it was like golden brown and it soaked up a lot of that oil. And then we blended it with Espolòn añejo.
I'm hungry thinking about this.
I know.
Okay,
all these
going.
things are very savory. It makes me very hungry too. So we blended that together and then strained it. So basically it ended up being like a horchata with Asian flavors, but instead of water, tequila, which is, and none of the sugar added. We were adding sweetener later, so we kept it very dry, but it was rich, it was flavorful, incredibly complex, and added just like a really great texture to drinks, which was super fun to play with. And then, okay, we had the rice element, but obviously the centerpiece of the cocktail was gonna have to be based in orange, because orange chicken. So we had to add orange juice and we added some citric acid, because when you're thinking about the way that like most mass-produced like foods are made, there's a lot of like, citric acid involved, and it kind of has that like candy citrus to it.
Yeah.
And then we decided to make a no chicken orange chicken syrup. This syrup is incredibly complex for a cocktail syrup, but it's not incredibly complex for a sauce you would make in a restaurant or at home for food. Most of us, I would say, probably know how to make like a decent sauce of some kind, and we're usually using more than 5 ingredients to do so. And so I feel like it's a little strange that when we make cocktail syrups, we tend to just limit them to 1 or 2 flavors instead of like putting in all the different flavors that you can make work together. This specific mix has star anise pods, cassia chips, clove, pink peppercorn, red chili, fennel seed, orange zest, mandarin orange zest, orange flower water, rice wine vinegar, okonomiyaki sauce, which is a Japanese barbecue sauce, and toasted sesame oil. So a lot for cocktail, not a lot for food. And I think that's a really easy hump for people to get over because anyone who cooks is used to having to pair all those flavors.
Right.
And I love when cocktails are seemingly simple. Like if you only have 5 actual touches when you're building your drink, that's ideal because it's really easy to get things in balance the more things you're trying to actually balance together. But when you make a compound syrup like that, you know exactly how much you need to put in there. And also it's everything you need in one flavor. Yes, it has all of those different components, but it ends up having one taste in the end. And that taste is orange chicken sauce. So that was super fun and just another example of Sharon's flavorful genius. We also have that orange peel flour. So you have some orange oils that are going to be present. And we also flamed some absinthe. Obviously star anise being one of the Chinese 5 spices, it was going to bring out that particular flavor out of the syrup blend that we made. And often your aroma is really going to be one of the strongest flavors you experience because we all know how important smell is on the taste buds. So having orange and Chinese 5 spice be the 2 aromatic elements really kind of push those flavors to the top.
Yeah, orange and anise are so good together. Yeah,
they are. It's just a great combo.
Yeah.
So this cocktail has a lot of very iconic images. Looking back at this, we've all seen those sort of plates if you've ever been to dim sum or a little hole in the wall Chinese restaurants.
I almost just teared up because I missed dim sum so much. I just almost started crying.
There's a dim sum place in Austin who I know is doing to go, and I'm like tempted to do it, but also it's just not the same.
It's not the same.
It's just not the same. I need people to come by with carts. I need to wave them down and have the person who actually speaks Cantonese on my table order everything. So we got this really cheap plastic Chinese patterned dishware. Not only is it very overtly Asian, but it also specifically references the inexpensive Chinese American takeout food that we've all grown up eating. So not only just like Asian, but very specific to the orange chicken concept. And then what is more iconically Asian American than fortune cookies? They were first made in San Francisco in the early 1900s by a Japanese like tea purveyor and cookie maker, but have now become just part of every single Chinese American takeout you'll ever have. So if you're going to be drinking a Chinese American takeout drink, you have to finish with a fortune cookie. Like I feel like that's incredibly obvious.
Yeah.
Obviously. And then the orange flower peel is very reminiscent of if you went to, at least I found this in Japanese restaurants in California as a kid, they would have like these full meal sets. Like you would have, like you'd get your curry and have your little side, and then there'd be a little thing of like vegetables. And then your dessert was always this orange that was cut up in a very pretty particular way with a little pick in it. And so you could eat the orange and as your dessert. And the way that they cut it is kind of looks like a flower, or at least it can, depending on who's doing it. So we are also adding like the visual luxury of an orange roast, but that very specific experience I grew up having. And so we've now incorporated all of the different possible experiences you could have getting Asian inexpensive cheap food growing up into one delicious super boozy package. And that is Ramon's Revival. So just to summarize a little bit of what we've talked about before, and also show off one of my favorite photos of all time, find yourself a pop-up where you can cosplay all your favorite characters and everyone you've wanted to be. I feel like a lot of the stuff that I've broken down was very extensive, but it wasn't super shocking. Like a lot of the bartenders I know can absorb this very easily. But some of it has been very exclusive to the Asian American audience. So those of you who grew up with a lot of Asian Americans or grew up around a lot of that culture probably got all of it. But I'm guessing not everyone that's listening right now has had Yamago Bo or been to a restaurant that cut oranges that way. And we have to admit that's a little bit by design. When looking at spaces, you have to think about the contexts that have been placed upon them already. Obviously, growing up in America and thinking about the people and who get to enjoy cocktails, most of those people are going to be middle to upper class white American families, or not families, adults. So when you're entering a cocktail space, you kind of have that sort of backdrop that subliminally exists there, maybe a little bit. We've come a long way. There are a lot more bartenders of color and representation involved, so I don't think it's as overt as it used to be. But also as Asian Americans, especially those who are first generation, I feel like going out to eat was always a very big treat. It wasn't something
big deal, yeah.
It was a big deal. Like we're going out to eat maybe once a week max, and it's to the same ramen place that I love. But that's what you're getting, and that's all it is. And so from a young age, like children pick up on a lot. I don't think that people who are of lower middle class or immigrant families or just, have that sort of like rigid financial structure in their lives are taught to indulge themselves in hospitality in the same way as upper middle class people are.
You're so right. You're not taught to do it. Yeah.
You're not. It's not part of the process.
No, I had to learn, like I was feral. Like I had to learn how to go to restaurants. Literally, like I had to learn about all this stuff. It was all new to me. This is not my native palate, like you said. Yeah.
And I have a lot of privilege as someone who grew up mixed because I have a little bit of both sides. Like I was not taught all of the Asian American things and I was not taught all of the white American things. But I had enough of both that I've come up with the fun Hapa me. But I think that it's important in these spaces to give people a little extra clue that they are invited. Just like when, you're a host starting out your first restaurant job, you always have to wave and smile to whoever comes in the space. Yes, that's going to be a general welcome. But when people also see like Sailor Moon playing on the projector and then Big Bang or Baby Metal as the music, I'm pouring frozen shots of baijiu and I'm using fish sauce in a drink, that just gave them 6 winks like, hey, you're Asian American, you definitely belong here. This is a place for you. Other people can enjoy it and love it and be part of it, but you are welcome to this place. And I think that's a really powerful thing to do for people who don't usually get to have that wink. We get it at dim sum and we get it at boba shops. We don't really usually get it in cocktail bars. So I think that culture is something that I've really enjoyed, being able to make these creative spaces, to make space in front of and behind the bar for Asian Americans, has been obviously a huge joy and what has caused all this stuff to happen. But I also want to say that while I've used pop-ups as a specific venue to explore these ideas and work on this cultural and technical work, they're super hard to produce. Don't feel like you have to do a pop-up. I feel like so many of my friends, after I started doing Daijoubu, have wanted to do something like it. And I'm like, you are welcome to, but remember that most pop-ups will be one night, maybe 3 if you're lucky. And you're going to only have a few hours to set up and tear down, and you're not going to make a ton of money. So if you're doing it, you have to choose something that's so important to you and your identity that it's worth all that extra work. And obviously, me and Sharon have found that, but don't feel like you have to use this information specifically for a pop-up context.
Yeah, it has to be more important than money.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I make very little money. If I'd probably have invested more money into this than I've actually made. But I love it very much. And hopefully it's going to bring me to a point someday where I can have my own bar, or we can make it a profitable point. And even if it doesn't, at least I know that in the future, it's likely that I'll find more Asian restaurants and bars that have cocktails that accurately represent the flavors that I grew up eating, instead of having to get a tiki cocktail that has nothing to do with Asian flavors every time I go to a hip Chinese restaurant, which is one of my biggest pet peeves in the whole world. So how does Daijoubu affect the world? How does our work, what does our work mean for you? Obviously, some of the stuff that I've talked about, we're hoping to make a difference, hoping to make spaces, hoping to make better representation. But I think one of the greatest joys that I've come out of working on Daijoubu with is having something that is very much my own and putting myself into these things. And I think that's something that a lot of bars and people who participate in cocktail competitions can definitely incorporate into their practice. For those of you who are doing cocktail competitions, by the time you get to a regional or national level, almost every single person that you're competing against is incredibly talented. They're always going to be technically great. They're always going to have some show-stopping flavor involved. But the biggest tool you have is your own identity, because that's the only thing that no one else will ever have. That is yours. So by imparting your identity into those cocktails, you're always going to have a little bit more of a story and a little bit more of a personality than if you had it. And obviously, every cocktail competition is different. You're going to be asked different parameters and different concepts. But this is something that through the cocktail competitions I've done, I found incredibly useful. And then specifically within the space of bars and restaurants, I found that most of my favorite jobs are places where I can put some of myself into the drink menu, or some of myself into the program, or some of myself into the hospitality, and having spaces where bartenders can really put themselves into the bar not only makes a more interesting drink and menu for your guests to enjoy, but it also really connects the bartenders to the bar in a way that you would only have if you were a part owner. If you own your cocktail and that cocktail's representation of you, and you are putting yourself out there in that way, you are then represented by the bar, and the bar is then represented by you. And I feel like bartenders who have that sort of connection, or anyone, bar backs and whoever's working involved, by having their voices heard and represented and their identities accepted in that space, that makes people want to work hard and stay for a long time and put themselves into it, which I think is probably one of the most important things you could do when building a bar program. That is my lecture. I'm going to open up for questions in a minute. There's Louise. I was worried we had lost.
I'm here. Yeah, I got questions for you. I got a couple.
But before I jump into that, I just want to say, if any of you want to reach out ever and have a thought about a concept, or you're interested in incorporating something or questions, please feel to reach out. I'm very active on my personal social media as well as Daijoubu's. And when we started this, there weren't a lot of other people to ask questions about cocktail pop-ups. And I reached out to Trash Tiki, and they were incredibly helpful and answered a bunch of questions. And so having more people who are willing to open up and share their work and the things that they've learned is just going to make the bartending and hospitality culture stronger, because we'll just have more stuff to learn from, and you don't have to do every little piece of hard work to get to your version of the hard work. And also, thank you for letting me lecture about the thing I've been doing for 1.5 years for 45 minutes. It has been a pleasure to analyze it and tell you about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, this is so great.
It.
Okay, so I just added your Instagram if people want to follow you. Can you say what Daijoubu means? I think that's helpful too.
Yeah,
what's on
absolutely.
my hat here?
Yeah. It's so exciting to see people wear swag that you make. It's just the coolest feeling.
The coolest feeling. Yes, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
So Daijoubu is probably the most common phrase in the Japanese language. If you've watched anime or any Japanese dramas, you'll probably hear it every like 45 seconds. But it basically means it's fine, but it's used as like the kind of okay in many different contexts, whether it's literal or sarcastic or like just brushing something off or saying like, I am fine in a very defined way. Depending on the way that you say Daijoubu, there are many meanings. But when me and Sharon first talked about what to call our pop-up, if we were in the middle of a busy shift and things were not so great, we'd often turn to each other and say, it's fine, and go back to work. And that was our little like, okay, I let out my stress, I had my moment, and now I'm going back. And the whole crew at Roosevelt Room, I felt like, at least at that point, was doing it. So when I was like studying Japanese, I was like, oh, Daijoubu. I feel like that really captures the feeling of not only like what we say to each other, but also our like frustrations with Asian identity in America and in the cocktail world, and how we also want to make it better instead of just accepting the issues and are actually trying to make it fine.
I love that. It's like so many layers, and like the way that everything you do has so many layers to it. But it fits within the theme. Like I was talking with John Lee about creativity the other day, and we were talking about how constraint actually leads to the most creativity. And I think what you and Sharon have done so beautifully is like giving yourself some very tight parameters to then have to create something really like big and broad. And so what you see is like, okay, we're only going to use these kind of flavors. We're only going to use these kind of products. Like we're going to keep this really tight. And then what you see is like this explosion of innovation and cocktails and development and like the costumes you guys wear, like the way that you take this idea and like make it really big because you're working within such tight confines is so cool. And something I feel like people get overwhelmed when they're creating something and they're like, oh my God, we could do so many things. And you're like, no, you can't. You can only do these things.
Take a concept,
help.
Go with it. Yeah.
Stick to it. And like, if you can't stick to it, like find a way to work around. Like, I love what you said about the rice. Like, okay, we had to figure out a way to make this work, but it had to work to our rules.
Yeah.
Rice. So cool. This is a question from Brittany Leach. In the Paper Crane, you started with a classic cocktail and reimagined it. So it's like, or in Ramon's Revival, you started with inspiration and built a cocktail. Do you find yourself favoring one of these approaches over the other? And I guess also like, would you maybe start with like a traditional Asian drink and then maybe try and like reverse engineer that into a cocktail? Might be another.
We've used all of those methods. When you're looking at making 40 different original cocktails in a year and a half, you kind of have to pull up from it everything that you have. I would say for those who are starting, it's really great to start with a classic cocktail. I'm hoping that most of the people that I'm talking to are, fairly well versed in at least 50 classic cocktails, if not more. Because if you haven't kind of done that introductory work, that's way more important than getting to this crazy stuff. That intro work helps a lot. So if someone is like looking to do that, I would say starting with something like that is great. But I come to bartending from a very artistic mindset, and wherever I find inspiration is where I'm going to go from. So all of the above.
Okay, we have another question, which is a great one. Is there a tactful way to speak about Asian-inspired cocktails that aren't well thought out culturally? You've shown us your process in thoughtfully incorporating your culture through research and creativity. Is it too much to ask of our non-Asian peers to be just as accountable when they find inspiration in Asian flavors?
Yes, thank you, please. I feel like there is a tendency to want to put a cool something on every cocktail. Like something has to be like an X factor, or like, wow, look at this ingredient no one's ever used before. And I feel like a lot of bartenders will quickly jump to a flavor or culture that they aren't very particularly immersed in because they view it as something unique and different. And all of a sudden, by slapping something on their drink that they're not familiar with, is gonna be like, wow, what a cool, innovative thing to add. But it's not cool or innovative for people who use those things every day when they eat food. So yes, I would love for people who are not of Asian descent to do a little research into why they're using that particular flavor. I don't think that every cocktail needs to be super Asian if it is Asian. Like you can use Asian ingredients and things that are not Asian cocktails because it comes down to flavor, and that's probably the most important part. But I have definitely seen both in classic cocktail bars and also Asian restaurants of any kind, drinks that are inappropriately using Asian flavors for a wow factor. And that is at least disrespectful, possibly kind of racist, but not ideal.
It's also like I struggle with people being like, well, I discovered this new thing. I'm like, you discovered it?
No.
You didn't discover it. You found it, or you came to learn about it, or you you were introduced to it or something, but like, did you discover it?
No.
This word's problematic on a lot of levels.
Yeah. And also, like, where did you discover it and in which context? Like, if you see a really dope dish and you've never used Szechuan peppercorn and you try mapo tofu and you're like, wow, I really love, like, the way this is numbing and also the way this pairs with, like, the ginger and soy. Cool. Make a cocktail with ginger, soy, and Szechuan peppercorn. That's dope. But if you're just doing the, like, buzz buttons because that's, like, a hip thing to do and it makes you numb and mouth numb, and you know that it's related to Szechuan peppercorn, that's not culturally expansive.
Yeah, that's like a whole nother class unto itself.
Yeah.
But I think this is a really good like starting place of just like being respectful and understanding where things come from and understanding there's traditions behind things and being thoughtful with the history of the ingredients you're using.
Yeah.
Let me see if I have anything. I think those are my only 2 questions for you.
Wow.
I guess we're exactly on time, so we're doing good. I guess my last question is just for you is like, what's next?
Yeah. So Daijoubu was at a very interesting time during quarantine. Obviously we can't travel this year. Our goal was to travel California because both me and Sharon growing up in Northern and Southern California, that sort of homecoming and also the large Asian population there felt like we could really, throw some really exciting and fun events and highlight some really talented bartenders who were out there. Sadly, that's not going to happen yet. We have had an opportunity not yet. I still think it will happen. It's just a matter of when. We had opportunities to pair up with bars all around the U.S. We've done Paper Plate in San Jose and some bars in Houston and Austin where we've done remote pop-ups or to-go pop-ups. We've done a lot of merch making, thus Anne Louise's beautiful hat, and have been selling a lot of that stuff and kind of leaning into the lifestyle brand that also exists within Daijoubu, that like I'm going to be unapologetically and extremely Asian, and that's okay. And I don't care what you say. I will wear my Hello Kitty backpack.
With your cat inside of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we've been making stickers to raise money for Asian American and also Black American issues. I think that everyone who's paid any attention to any form of news right now needs to know that, need to acknowledge that it's a very delicate time in terms of racial identity, and looking at how Asian Americans have a lot of privilege, but also may or may not lean into the model minority myth and a lot of other deep-seated contextual things that have existed since we've been in America. We've spent a lot of time talking about that on our social media, and then also trying to support organizations who are doing work in the name of safety for both Asian Americans and Black Americans. This hasn't been officially announced, but I'm going to kind of hint at it because, fun new stuff on the horizon.
That's a drum roll. I'm playing for you.
Yeah.
Okay, go.
Thank you. We are currently working on doing a to-go marketplace in Austin with our cocktails and food from multiple Asian American food vendors. We found a couple people who usually run food pop-ups, supper clubs, or have food that's sold in marketplaces. And a lot of these people, like us, can't do their usual thing. And we're all Asian-owned businesses who are basically stalled until we can go out again. Why not combine our efforts and try to support our culture and our economy and sell that food and drink in a space that supports us? Also, I'm really excited. I'm pretty sure all of these businesses are also women-owned. We're still talking, so I don't want to say for sure, but will hopefully be coming in the next month. So follow Daijoubu Pop Up. We'll have lots of details on that very soon.
I love that. So one of my when people ask me like, how do I get a job, or how do I, how do I grow in my career? I have this thing that I say, which is do the job before you have the job. And I with a caveat, that means don't do that for free. Like, don't work for free, but do the job before you have the job, and build the world that you want to be in. Like, don't wait for someone else to make it for you. And you are like I'm gonna like start crying. Like, you are the embodiment. Like, you are what inspired that, from that advice that I give to people. And then I point to you and I look at what Caer and Sharon are doing, and they're building the world they want to be in, and they're making the drinks they want everyone to be drinking, and they're getting to share their voices. And it's because you have that passion. You see, like, the motor is just going, and everyone wants to support you. Like, you're being brave and bold, and the universe is coming to your aid. And so it's so fun to see you doing this, and coming more into yourself, and becoming more of a leader, and watching both what you and Sharon, I feel like Sharon should be here. Like, she's also like the other, she's the third person here. What you guys are doing is incredible. And thank you so much for all that you're giving, both like visibly and in representation, and also giving to your communities, and offering also as like a template for what other people could do, especially women, and especially women of color and women of different backgrounds, of what you can do.
Yeah, I'm really hoping people who are watching are coming out of this knowing that they are fully capable of doing all of these things. And not only are they capable, but now I am a resource for you if you want to do these things and you need help, because right now I'm mostly at home. So please reach out if you have questions. Please, if you are passionate about something and you are a bartender, put your passions into your work. There's no reason not to have that in part of it. And also thank you to everyone who has supported us, because yes, I feel like we put a lot of work in, and it takes a lot from ourselves. But if we didn't have lines out the door, the very first event that we did, we wouldn't have done another event. There's so much work that goes into this, and unless people are responding, it's so hard to pull yourself up and continue to do the incredibly hard work. But because our community has been so supportive and responsive, we've been able to continue to build this thing into now something that is much larger than we ever thought it would be.
I love it. Well, good luck with all you're doing. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Portland Cocktail Week Distance Learning has some really great stuff coming up. More conversations with amazing people like Caer, teaching all sorts of wild and inventive, creative, problem-solving, solution-finding information and education. So we'll be back with you. Campari sponsors on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but there's stuff all week long. So we'll see you back soon. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Caer.
Thanks, guys.